when you're testing with a brain gauge, you're getting an accurate assessment of what's called functional connectivity, how well things in your brain are connected. When those connections get weak, then the scores do poorly. But you can also do exercises to strengthen those connections.
Just like our physical body, when we get out of shape, we go to the gym and we exercise and build up muscle strength. The brain is no different. Hi there. Welcome back to the Rethink Aging podcast. I'm so excited to be joined by Dr. Mark Tommerdahl, PhD, today. Mark is a neuroscientist, a researcher, and founder of Brain Gauge, a new technology that we're implementing here in our practice for our patients and community. It's a very innovative cognitive assessment tool and brain training tool that is just really exciting. I'm excited to dive in. Mark, thank you so much for being here and generously giving of your time.
Oh, thank you for having me. I
Yeah.
always enjoy talking about the brain gauge.
Super. Well, I have a little example of what the brain gauge is. It looks like a mouse, but it is very, very sophisticated technology that's been miniaturized.
It
I'd
has.
love,
It's
yeah.
actually lost about 100 pounds in 20 years. And I'm glad you started with that, because we call it, I've been telling people, it is a lab in a mouse.
Hmm.
And, we basically had a $1 million laboratory from, in 1980s, 1990s up to present. But, that was what we did our neurophysiological experiments with. And we basically shrink that and put it inside something the size of a computer mouse.
Yeah, well, actually, step back a little bit. I'd love to hear about your academic pedigree and just kind of your journey. Give us a little snapshot into how you
Sure.
ended up
Yeah,
creating the
so
brain gauge.
I got a like most people, went to college, and I got a BS in biology and at Davidson College. And then I I wanted to study how the brain worked. And I went to University of North Carolina. But one thing I didn't at the time, and this makes me sound very old, but at the time I thought biologists didn't really weren't implementing technology well enough. So I went to graduate school in biomedical engineering and mathematics, because I wanted to be able to implement engineering and cutting edge technologies into science. And that was why and so I got a master's and PhD while working in a neurophysiology lab. And then after that, I did a postdoc in neurobiology, and I was always working as in the neurophysiology lab, I was also the in-house engineer for a number of labs. So I got exposed to many different studies, doing both and many different approaches, using EEG, MRI, but we were also doing our own animal studies. But my main emphasis back then was studying what we call functional organization of the brain. And basically, how does the brain work, and how do different groups of cells interact inside the brain? And that's what I was fascinated with, was studying those interactions. And we came up with a lot of new ideas about it, but we wanted to translate it. And so translating means, okay, let's take, it's great to write papers about what you do in the lab, but it doesn't do a whole lot for the rest of the world. So we wanted to translate it, because we knew that what we'd been learning could have a big impact on understanding better about some neurological disorders. And, to be quite frank, after about 20 years of studying in the lab, I started having some neurological issues myself. And I actually, and I was like, wow, I wonder what my problem is. And I started evaluating myself and testing myself, and I figured out, oh, I've got MS. And I was going downhill pretty fast. I started being a researcher, I researched it exhaustively and found out, well, okay, there's some ways to correct this, but how do you track it and see that you're getting better? So I And I was sitting there, how am I going to try this? I'm sitting in $1 million facility. I was like, oh, I think I can figure out how to do this. I'd been studying how the brain works, how the interactions work, and I could track and see that I was actually getting better from the processes I do. And, fast forward a few years from that, and I made the acquaintance of Bob Dennis, who had just joined the faculty in biomedical engineering, which was I had matriculated to faculty at that time. And we had a lot of whiteboard talks. We used to call them chalk talks. We call them whiteboard talks now. And looked at talking about interactions in the brain. And he said, well, how can I help you? And I said, well, I'd really like if we could deliver high fidelity stimuli, really accurate stimuli to the skin. We could answer questions about lots of neurological disorders in the world. I mean, I'd already done this in the lab, but it was 200-pound pieces of equipment. And so that cost about $30,000 each and $1980. So it was quite expensive to do. But anyway, he said, oh, okay. And so he, he had me come and talk to his design students. And so the senior design students, and we talked, and everybody, all the administrators at the university get their ears perked up when they say, oh, you had students build this. No, that's not what happened. We just gave them the project and said, hey, let's see what you can do. And as senior undergraduate students often do, they were very enthusiastic, but they didn't do anything. They basically spent their spring semester doing other things, partying and, enjoying their senior year. And then Bob spent a weekend and with some duct tape and some fishing wire, literally fishing wire as part of the first prototype, built a device that basically knocked it out of the park. It worked really well. And the design was very good enough to get several papers and $1 million worth of funding. And from that, we actually built the world's first portable tactile stimulator. So that was the very first time. You see, everybody knew back in the 1980s, or at least my mentor knew. That's the way he recruited me to his lab. He told me the story. He said, look, everybody, we want to understand how the brain works. And the best way to study the brain is study cerebral cortex. But to study that, the best way to understand, because all of cerebral cortex is organized the same way, the best way to understand it and the best way to study it is through the sense of touch, through the somatosensory cortex. Well, everybody knew that, but nobody wanted to do it because, well, you can study visual cortex with a flashlight and you could study auditory cortex with a speaker. But when it comes to mechanical stimuli, it was really, really hard. So that was a major engineering overtaking. Things that you had to do was overcome that particular problem. But we forged on, and and somatosensory cortex is positioned right in the middle of the brain. It is the Goldilocks of the sensory cortices. It's not too big. It's not too small. It's just right. It's right next door to motor cortex. And this is one reason why brain training with brain gauge works so well. It's a longer story than that. You'd have to come to my workshop for me to go into all those details. But anyway,
Mark, I'm going to interrupt you for one
interrupt
moment.
me. I get carried away. So
break it down for our listeners how with a mouse like this that delivers little vibrations to the fingertips.
Yes.
How is that giving us a window into our cortical function of our brain? What's the neuroscience there? Can you put it in layman's terms?
Sure, in layman's terms. Okay, so what we do is we vibrate the fingertips, and we just do digit 2 and digit 3, the index finger and the middle finger. And, we vibrate those two, and they activate places in the brain that are side by side. It causes activity, and it causes the brain to talk, those places in the brain to talk to each other in a specific way. And then we just ask really simple questions. And those questions are, which vibration is larger, which one lasted longer, which came first. And the questions are done in a very, it's just like reading an eye chart. So where it starts out really easy and then gets really hard as you get closer and closer to your specific measure. As you know, an eye chart is extremely accurate for coming up with eyeglass prescriptions. And that is a sensory test. And just like that, the brain gauge is very, very accurate. It outperforms medical imaging technology because it has higher resolution. So you can tell the difference. So if I vibrate your two fingers, you can probably tell the difference in intensity by about 10%. But medical imaging can only tell, it's going to need about a 200% difference to tell a difference.
Oh,
And
interesting.
that's under just
Okay.
normal conditions. So, but anyway, we can direct different, we can activate different circuitry in the brain by asking different questions or by changing the stimuli. And the stimuli can be complex, but the questions are always easy. And that's really not part of the test. We just has really easy questions to do.
Yes, I love that it's a biologically based test. You're actually measuring the function of the brain, not just, asking questions.
It's a performance-based measure, just like any physical test might be. The physical analog might be finding out how physically fit you are, like walking around the track, walking up a flight of stairs, or, going to the gym and lifting weights.
Yeah, so it's like a brain fitness test.
It is. It's a brain
And
fitness test.
you have like 8 different metrics that it measures: speed, focus, accuracy, those sort of things, neuroplasticity, and then you have an overall score, the cortical metrics, that's like
Yeah.
a brain health
So,
score.
so
Unpack that for us.
just as a sidebar, those 8 metrics come from our standard battery, and researchers do a whole lot more. And so the standard battery takes 15 minutes or so to complete, and it gives you a lot of what we call specificity. So different measures target different functions or different mechanisms. And those different mechanisms, when you compile them all together, and you can get an overall score, they all have different meanings. They actually have different time courses. So, for example, if somebody gets a concussion and you start measuring them, some of the measures will actually look okay at first. Other measures will look horrible at first, but some of the measures will get better really quick, and the other measures get worse later on because, like, when you bang your head, actually the inflammation kicks in a little bit 2 to 3 days later, and you actually get a little bit worse on some scores. So some scores will get better really quick, but, like when you have a concussion, it'll take 2 to 3 weeks, a mild concussion, take 2 to 3 weeks to fully recover. And some of the measures take longer than others to recover, and that's just a reflection of that.
Okay, super. Yeah, and I've heard you talk about this test is really accurate at picking up changes, even from simple things like taking a over-the-counter cold medicine to a concussion to, neurodegenerative processes. So it's able to pick up on any kind of insult to the brain.
Any neurological issue. I mean, we haven't really met one that the brain gauge wasn't sensitive to. And you mentioned the cough syrup. That was a direct correlation with our laboratory results but in the lab, when we're doing animal studies, we use very powerful, what are NMDA receptor blockers, very powerful drugs, things like ketamine or PCP. But you can't do that with people when you're doing studies. And we said, well, let's see what happens if because we know this impacts plasticity in a specific way. Why don't we go ahead and try this in people but dial it back a little and give it a little weaker drug, same class. And dextromethorphan, which is cough syrup, is in that same class as things like ketamine. And, ketamine is a common anesthetic. PCP is also a street drug, vincyclidine, or known as angel dust or whatever. But dextromethorphan, and it's got a very quick time course. If you've ever taken cough syrup and it made you feel loopy, a little bit, that's what we're measuring, is that loopiness. We're measuring that change. So it's a very, it's a very sensitive test. That particular test. It doesn't change all the measures, but it does change some.
Well, we're just getting started with using the brain gauge in our clinical practice. I'd love to just get your perspective on how other clinicians out there in the world are implementing this into their practice. What kind of, you know, benefits do you see with patient care? And
Oh, lots of benefits. I'll just go through like the way most clinicians are implementing it now. And what they're doing is they are taking taking like a 15-minute full battery test at the beginning when they first do an initial consult with a patient. And they look at the scores and they say that's their starting point. And then they may do treatments. There's different treatments that they do. And some people, depending on the treatment, some people are actually testing people uh, before and after that treatment. Now, there's also, besides a standard battery, there's what we call a quick check. We have a 90-second test, which is really, it doesn't have as much specificity, but it is very good at looking at the impact of different treatments. And so sometimes people are just using they're using the quick check every time this patient walks in the door. They'll just do the long battery at the very beginning to get an initial assessment. But then each time the patient walks in the door, they'll do the quick check or the 90-second test just to just like a vital sign, just like taking their blood pressure. And a lot of times they'll go ahead and they'll measure them before and after. Now, a lot of times after the treatment, they'll say, okay, maybe the treatment only takes 10, 15 minutes, depending on what they're doing, whether it's some kind of electroceutical or some kind of therapy. They'll go ahead and add brain training with a brain gauge and let the patient do the brain training after that treatment. And, a lot of electroceuticals are they're a little bit analogous to sports massage in the physical world. They kind of
Mhm.
massage the brain a little bit and kind of loosen things up, and it puts them in a better state so they can do things. The thing to remember is that when you're testing with a brain gauge, you're getting an accurate assessment of what's called functional connectivity, how well things in your brain are connected. And all the different measures are different types of connections. And when those connections get weak, then the scores do poorly. But you can also do exercises to strengthen those connections. So,
I love that you're
yeah,
bringing up that piece of it because this is not only diagnostic, but it actually is a therapeutic tool. And it took me a little bit of time to get my head around that. I don't know why, just like our physical body, when we get out of shape, we go
really,
to the gym and we exercise and build up muscle strength. And um, the brain is no different.
the
Actually,
brain is
training the
no different.
brain
It's made out
can
of the
improve.
same stuff, the same stuff. And you want to exercise it the same way that you exercise your body. And, the next part in the clinic, what a lot of clinicians do, or or a lot of the patients do, is they get brain gauge home units because they don't want to come into the doctor's office as often as they would like to do the training. And so people always ask, maybe this was your question, how often should you do brain training, or how often should you do brain fitness exercises? And the answer to that is to always think in parallel with physical fitness. And so physical fitness is, if I were to ask you the question, how often do you work out? How often do you need to work out? And maybe is a better question. So, sometimes people are busy and they don't work out as much as they should. But, and the first answer is, well, at least twice a week. You should at least go on a walk a couple times a week, maybe 3 times a week. But what we see is in physical fitness is that 2 times a week is kind of the minimum. If you work out 3 times a week, there's a huge cost benefit. And this is something that I learned in competitive athletics. I have probably as much of a background in competitive athletics as I do in neuroscience, decades in different sports. And people would always ask, how often should we train? I was like, well, at least 3 days a week. And that really makes a huge difference if you work out in just 20 minutes a day. And it's like, it's like going to the gym.
Mhm. Yep, so we'll add brain training to our list of self-care for keeping our brain fit as we age. Where do you see this tool being helpful with neurodegenerative processes like Alzheimer's disease or mild cognitive impairment? How sensitive is it to picking those things up? And have you seen any impact from doing the brain training on neurodegenerative conditions?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I've been working with a lot of different clinicians who are doing different types of treatments, and the brain gauge does pick up mild cognitive impairment. But the other thing is, a lot of times, and a lot of times they're doing brain training in conjunction with that treatment. And a lot of people are actually now just doing brain training. So they'll do a little bit of some treatments and some brain training. But one thing that we know is that when the brain gauge scores are low, it means one of two things. If the brain gauge scores are not good, it means either, yes, there is a problem, or you're simply out of shape. It's just like physical fitness. But if you keep your scores up, and as what we see is like some people with early memory loss, there's experiencing some memory loss, and they start brain training, and their scores get better, and at the same time their memory loss reverses. So that's, we can't make the claim that the brain training is reversing the memory loss, but the people who are doing it are saying, I'm pretty sure this reversed my memory loss. So as long as they keep their scores up, and there's no cases where someone with dementia has a good brain gauge score.
Mhm.
I mean, there's plenty of cases where people with subpar scores don't have dementia. They may have a
Sure.
concussion, they may just be having a bad day, they may be out of shape. But when their scores are good, there's never a case where their scores are where somebody with dementia has good scores. And that's a really interesting thing. And, just like some of our scores you can trace back in the literature 150 years. And so we know for a fact that, what a consistent scoring should be and what it means. So,
Super, super. Well, I know there's lots of research going on. You have over 100 different scientific publications
really?
with the brain gauge. Where's the future going? What are you excited about in the research?
Yeah, and the research, well, we're working with a lot of different people doing a lot of different treatments or supplements. And so what we're doing is we're trying to drill down on specificity. Like, okay, we're gonna like when you get the first treatment, which scores get better, or which scores, like for example, in one treatment plan, we know that, when somebody's doing a certain type of neurofeedback system where they actually put electrodes on the brain, we're learning that, oh, if these scores didn't get better after several treatments, they need to move the electrodes. So we're trying to help people get their treatments better. And that's
Hmm.
the exciting part. We're also building out the Brain Gauge Gym so that it has additional additional platforms. Right now, we have like a basic platform, and we also have a therapeutic platform for people that really need a lot of help. But we also have an elite platform for people who are way ahead and way ahead of the norm. And this is for like, we have elite athletes who want to be the best of the best. And in order for them, reaction time is a really easy one to talk about. And a lot of people say, they want their reaction time to be faster so that they can compete better. Obviously, they think faster, they move faster, and they perform at their sports better. So I'm very excited to see, keep improving the brain training. We have some stuff in beta that looks very promising for new applications of that. But we're always trying to. And one thing I'm always blown away with is how good people are getting and how much it helps them in their personal life. Or the feedback I'm getting from people is really positive.
Well, super. I'm excited to start using this with my patients and of course myself. I want to get to all green across the board. And I imagine that things such as physical fitness and athletic training would improve people's scores because of the way that
Yeah,
our
physical
bodies
fit.
are.
So if somebody wants to, if you want to follow all the recognized protocols, all the recognized things that improve brain fitness or maintain brain fitness, no matter what your genetic background, you need to do things like exercise. You need to um, do exercise, good diet, get plenty of fresh air, things like that, and of course take supplements. But at least with the brain gauge, you can actually track and see what the impact of those different interventions is. And that's the thing that we see is like we've done actual studies to see how much the differences between somebody who's active and somebody who's inactive, and the difference between sedentary and active physically. Now, the differences between people who are active and sedentary at a very young age isn't that big. So, when you're all those youthful people in their 20s, they don't care. They're still, you know, they don't care about neurodegeneration, and they don't care. All they
Mhm.
care, the only time we work with them is when they hurt themselves,
Yeah.
when they bang their heads or something. But as we get older in the 50s and 60s, the difference between people that are active and people that are sedentary is enormous.
Yeah.
And the thing that's interesting is the people who are active, their scores still look really good. And so that's the thing. You want to maintain really good scores.
That's encouraging.
Yeah. Well,
Love to
one
hear that.
reason there's multiple reasons physical exercise helps. But one of the reasons is the same reason the brain gauge gym works. And when you do exercise, you are strengthening connectivity in that sensory motor region.
Right.
And you're doing the same thing with a brain gauge, except you're not huffing and puffing.
Mhm.
You're you're sitting there and yes, it is actually a physical tool where you physically respond to a physical vibration.
Mhm.
And that connectivity required to do that is the same kind of connectivity that's required to do any kind of exercise.
Amazing. Well, I love that, and just to be clear for my patients that are listening, Dr. Mark did not just give you permission not to
No,
exercise.
I'm not. I'm
Bring
emphasizing do the exercises. I work out every day, and that's it's very helpful.
Yeah. Well, Mark, thank you so much. I can't tell you how excited I am about this technology. It's we have some ways that we have, measured brain function over time, of course, imaging studies and then the metabolic inflammatory markers on blood work and tests we can do in the office, questionnaires, but this is so wonderful that it's easy, it's affordable, and we're looking at something that's very biologically based and can change over time based on our interventions. And so it's as a functional medicine physician focused on brain health and trying to help people, be proactive about their brain and recover, I feel like it's a invaluable tool. So thank you for all the work that you've done over the years. It's really a feat of, like, neuroscience, like, just the best of taking the research and then also the engineering aspect of putting it into this really portable, affordable device where we can have a powerful, very accurate measurement of brain health. And so I'm very grateful and excited about your technology.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm looking forward to working with you and seeing what kind of results you get with your patients.
Yeah, super. Well, tell our listeners how they can learn more if they want to dive more into the science. I know you have a great YouTube channel.
Yeah, the Brain Gauge YouTube channel is one place to learn about it. Our website is another place. You can always find that by typing in Brain Gauge on Google search, and it's corticalmetrics.com, not as catchy. It's Brain Gauge, not Brian Gauge. which is the more common misspelling. But we even bought the domain for Brian Gauge once, just for a joke, just because we need to redirect people. But you type in
Mhm.
brain gauge and you'll find all kinds of information on the YouTube channel, all kinds of information on our website. And I do free consults. So you can find that on our
Amazing.
website as well. And if anybody that wants to talk to me about the brain gauge, I'm happy to chat with them about it.
Okay, well, super. Thank you so much for your time, Mark. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I look forward to our working relationship.
I do too. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode of Rethink Aging, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone you love. For more episodes and highlights from the show, you can check out more videos right here and here. I also invite you to join the Rethink Aging community at caringforthebody.org, where you can find more resources on how to better protect your brain, strengthen your body, and live with purpose. Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll catch you in the next episode.